Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey, not to the grand pyramids or the bustling markets, but into a quiet, often overlooked corner of ancient Egypt, the life of a scribe. We're going to peel back the layers of respect and privilege to reveal what it sucked to be a scribe in ancient Egypt and more. You might imagine a life of intellectual pursuit and easy living, but trust me, the reality was often one of brutal discipline, physical discomfort, and endless monotony. A quick reality check. USC with your ergonomic chairs and digital keyboards probably wouldn't last a single week in scribe school. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling up to it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to see where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You might think of ancient Egyptian scribes as revered intellectuals, effortlessly creating beautiful hieroglyphs. But the path to becoming one was a grueling, often painful, ordeal. This was the grueling gauntlet of scribe school, a system of brutal discipline, rote memorization, and physical discomfort designed to break you down and rebuild you as a meticulous, obedient record keeper. Imagine yourself as a young boy, perhaps just 5 or 6 years old, leaving your family home to attend a scribe school. This isn't a cozy classroom with friendly teachers. Discipline is paramount, enforced with a literal whip. The Book of Kemet, a collection of scribal texts, famously states, "A boy's ear is on his back. He listens when he is beaten." Imagine the constant fear of the lash, knowing that any mistake, any moment of inattention, could result in a painful beating. You'd see other boys being punished, their cries echoing in the dusty classroom, a grim lesson that forced you to focus intently despite the pain and discomfort. A common historical fact is that Egyptian scribe schools were notoriously harsh, relying heavily on corporal punishment to enforce discipline and rote learning. Your days were incredibly long, starting at dawn and often lasting until dusk. You're learning the three main scripts: hieroglyphic, the formal picture writing; hieratic, a cursive form used for most administrative and literary texts; and later demotic, an even more simplified cursive for daily use. This wasn't about understanding concepts. It was about rote memorization and perfect replication. Imagine painstakingly drawing hundreds of individual hieroglyphs, each one precise, each one perfect. Then transitioning to the fluid, complex strokes of hieratic, where a single misplaced flick of the wrist could change the meaning of an entire word. Your hand would cramp, your eyes would ache, and your back would seize up from hunching over your writing board for hours. Your writing materials were expensive and precious. You'd learn on ostraca pottery shards or limestone flakes for practice, then progress to the highly valued papyrus. Imagine making your own ink, grinding pigments, and carefully mixing them. Your reed pen needed constant sharpening with a knife, requiring precision to achieve the fine lines of hieratic script. Any wasted papyrus, any spilled ink, would be met with severe reprimand or punishment. This added another layer of pressure to an already demanding task, as mistakes were not just errors, they were costly. Historians still debate the average literacy rate in ancient Egypt, but it was undoubtedly very low, underscoring the elite and specialized nature of scribal education. Beyond writing, you'd also be learning basic mathematics, geometry essential for land surveying and construction, and administration. You'd memorize lists of titles, taxes, and grain measurements. Imagine being drilled constantly on these mundane but critical details, knowing that a single incorrect number could throw off an entire calculation for the pharaoh's treasury. The physical discomfort was constant. You wouldn't sit at a desk. You'd typically squat or kneel on the hard ground, holding a writing board or papyrus roll in your lap. Imagine the strain on your legs, your back, and your neck from maintaining such an uncomfortable position for hours on end. The classrooms were often dim, dusty, and unventilated, contributing to eye strain and respiratory issues. You'd be perpetually tired, your body aching, but driven by the fear of punishment and the promise of future status. The psychological toll was immense. You were constantly under pressure to perform perfectly, to memorize endlessly, and to endure pain without complaint. Your childhood was a grueling apprenticeship, a complete immersion in a demanding craft that left little room for spontaneous play or personal expression. Your worth was measured solely by your ability to accurately record and meticulously copy. So, as you hear the distant scratch of a reed pen, remember that becoming an Egyptian scribe was a brutal, physically and mentally exhausting endeavor. It was a rigorous gauntlet designed to forge obedience, precision, and endurance, leaving little doubt that the privileged status of a scribe was hard-won and often painfully acquired. It certainly makes you appreciate interactive whiteboards and comfortable chairs, one doesn't it? For an Egyptian scribe, the pen was mightier than the sword, but it also wielded a heavy, disciplinary hand. You've just survived the harsh discipline and grueling memorization of scribe school, your hands aching from meticulous practice. But the physical discomfort didn't end with your education. It was a constant companion throughout your adult life as a scribe. Now, prepare to understand the physical toll of daily writing, discovering the chronic aches, pains, and repetitive strain injuries that plagued ancient Egyptian scribes from long hours of meticulous script. Imagine yourself, now a trained scribe, working in a bustling government office, a temple scriptorium, or perhaps overseeing a building project in the scorching sun. Your primary tool is the reed pen, a sharpened stick that needs constant recutting with a small knife to maintain its fine point. Your desk is often not a desk at all. You're typically squatting or kneeling on the floor, or sitting cross-legged, with a wooden writing board or a papyrus scroll laid across your lap. Imagine holding this uncomfortable position for hours on end, day after day. Your back would ache, your neck would stiffen, and your legs would cramp constantly. There were no ergonomic chairs, no standing desks, just the relentless strain on your spine and joints. Then there's the sheer physicality of the writing process itself. Hieratic and later demotic scripts, though cursive, still demanded incredible precision. You're not just scribbling, you're carefully forming each stroke, each symbol, with a delicate touch to avoid blots on the precious papyrus. Your writing hand would be in a constant state of tension, gripping the reed pen, making tiny, repetitive movements. Imagine the cramps in your fingers, the stiffness in your wrist, and the throbbing pain in your forearm. This constant, fine motor work, performed for hours on end without proper rest or stretching, would inevitably lead to what we now call repetitive strain injuries. Chronic pain, numbness, or even weakness in your hand and arm. A common historical fact is that many Egyptian scribes are depicted in a cross-legged position, often with a papyrus roll across their lap, indicating their standard working posture. Your eyes would also suffer immensely. Whether you were working in the dim, smoky interior of a temple, or squinting under the bright, unfiltered desert sun while surveying fields, your vision was under constant assault. The fine details of hieroglyphs and the tiny strokes of hieratic script demanded intense focus. Imagine the constant strain, the headaches from eye fatigue, and the blurring vision as your eyes struggled to maintain clarity in challenging light conditions. Without eyeglasses or modern corrective lenses, your eyesight would inevitably deteriorate with age, potentially leading to debilitating vision problems, or even blindness, long before old age. We'll explore this specific burden in more detail later, but it was a direct physical consequence of your trade. The preparation of materials also added to your physical burden. You would be involved in grinding minerals to make pigments for ink, a dusty and repetitive task. You'd mix these pigments with water and a binder to create your inks, constantly stirring and preparing. Papyrus itself, while prepared by specialists, was still handled by scribes, and could be coarse or brittle, causing minor cuts or abrasions to your hands. Imagine your fingers constantly stained with black and red ink, often cracked and dry from handling materials in the desert environment. Beyond the specific act of writing, your duties might require you to be on the move, As a scribe, you might accompany officials to inspect granaries, survey fields after the Nile flood, or record legal proceedings in various locations. This meant walking long distances under the hot sun, navigating uneven terrain, and carrying your writing equipment, a heavy wooden pallet, ink cakes, a water pot, and rolls of papyrus. Imagine the physical exhaustion, the dust, and the heat that would accompany these official duties, adding another layer of physical strain to your already demanding life. Even within an office setting, the conditions were far from comfortable. The buildings might be dusty, prone to insect infestations, and lack proper ventilation. You'd be breathing in airborne particles from papyrus, ink, and general grime, contributing to respiratory irritation. So, as you hear the distant scratch of a reed pen on an imaginary papyrus roll, remember that the seemingly intellectual life of an ancient Egyptian scribe came with a heavy physical toll. Their dedication to literacy and record-keeping was paid for in aching backs, cramped hands, strained eyes, and chronic physical discomfort. It certainly makes you appreciate your comfortable desk setup and modern eye care, doesn't it? For an Egyptian scribe, the tools of their trade were also instruments of their slow, physical decline. You've just considered the physical toll of a scribe's daily writing, from aching backs to strained hands. But beyond the bodily discomfort, there was a deeper, more insidious challenge that could wear down even the most dedicated scribe monotony: endless copies and records. Forget stimulating intellectual debates or creative writing. The truth was a soul-numbing repetition of copying existing texts and meticulously recording mundane details. Day in, day out, often for decades. Imagine yourself, an ancient Egyptian scribe, arriving at your workplace. It could be a temple scriptorium, a government office, or even a military outpost. Your task for the day, and likely for many days to come, is to meticulously copy texts. This isn't just a casual duplication, it's a sacred duty. You might be copying religious hymns onto temple walls, transcribing funerary spells onto papyrus for a tomb, or duplicating administrative records for the pharaoh's bureaucracy. Imagine the endless repetition of the same hieroglyphs or hieratic signs, hundreds upon hundreds of times. Your hand moves with practiced precision, but your mind might ache from the sheer lack of variation. There are no new stories to create, no innovative ideas to express, just the faithful, unerring reproduction of what already exists. A common historical fact is that many surviving ancient Egyptian texts are copies made by scribes over centuries, demonstrating the scale of this repetitive work. Beyond copying, a significant portion of your time would be spent on recording mundane details. As a scribe, you were the backbone of the Egyptian administration. This meant documenting everything: grain harvests, tax assessments, census figures, court proceedings, military supplies, and labor allocations for colossal building projects like pyramids or temples. Imagine sitting under the scorching sun or in a dusty, dimly lit office, tallying countless numbers, listing endless names, and describing repetitive events. You're recording the exact number of baskets of wheat delivered, the precise dimensions of building stones, or the inventory of tools for a work gang. This wasn't exciting, it was tedious, meticulous, and utterly essential work, but profoundly unstimulating for the intellect. The lack of creative freedom would be immense. While some highly accomplished scribes might eventually compose their own texts like instructions or wisdom literature, for the vast majority, their role was purely as a conduit, a faithful reproducer of established information. Imagine having a fertile mind, perhaps a knack for storytelling or poetic expression, but being confined to the rigid formats and prescribed content of administrative or religious texts. Your creativity would be stifled, your imagination dormant, in favor of absolute accuracy and adherence to convention. Historians still debate how much original thought or creative license scribes might have subtly woven into their copies or records, especially in literary texts, versus being strictly literal reproducers. The physical setting for this monotony didn't help. You're often in the same cramped, dusty room, day after day, year after year? The sounds are repetitive, the scratch of your own reed pen, the distant murmurs of other scribes, perhaps the occasional shout from an overseer. There's little to break the rhythm, little to stimulate the senses beyond the task at hand. Your world shrinks to the papyrus in front of you and the endless stream of data you must transcribe. Even the calendar of duties would contribute to the monotony. Many scribal tasks were seasonal, tied to the agricultural cycle or the administrative year. This meant certain periods would be dominated by tax collection records, others by harvest assessments, and still others by preparation for religious festivals. While the type of mundane record might change, the act of recording it would remain the same, ensuring a predictable, unvarying rhythm to your working life. The psychological toll of this endless repetition, this lack of intellectual novelty, would be significant. You might feel a profound sense of weariness, a spiritual exhaustion from the constant, unvarying grind. Your days would blur into each other, each one a mirror of the last, leaving you with little sense of progress or excitement. While the status of a scribe was high and the work avoided physical labor, it exchanged one form of hardship for another, the soul-crushing weight of endless, repetitive mental exertion. So, as you hear the distant, rhythmic scratch of a pen, remember that for an ancient Egyptian scribe, their respected profession often meant a life defined by profound monotony. Their days were filled with endless copying and the meticulous recording of mundane details, a constant battle against intellectual boredom and the soul-numbing repetition of their sacred duty. It certainly makes you appreciate diverse job responsibilities and the opportunity for creative expression in your own work, doesn't it? For an Egyptian scribe, the greatest challenge wasn't always understanding. It was enduring the endlessly repetitive nature of their craft. You've just been immersed in the soul-numbing monotony that characterized much of a scribe's daily routine. An endless cycle of copying and recording. But even with the mental fortitude to endure such repetition, there was a constant, underlying anxiety that could turn a scribe's life into a high-stakes gamble. The threat of papyrus shortages. Forget readily available paper. In ancient Egypt, papyrus was a precious, essential, and sometimes scarce resource, and running out of it or making a costly mistake on it carried severe consequences. Imagine yourself, an ancient Egyptian scribe, meticulously working on a vital document, perhaps a royal decree, a temple inventory, or a complex legal contract. Your reed pen scratches softly across the smooth surface of the papyrus. This isn't just paper, it's the very foundation of Egyptian bureaucracy and knowledge. Papyrus was made from the pith of the papyrus plant, which grew primarily in the Nile Delta. Its production was a labor-intensive process, making it an expensive and valuable commodity, often controlled by the state or major temples. The first source of anxiety was simply procuring enough papyrus. While high-ranking scribes might have more consistent access, lower-level scribes, or those in remote areas, could face real challenges in obtaining sufficient quantities. Imagine constantly worrying about your supply, knowing that if you ran out, your work would grind to a halt, and your ability to fulfill your duties would be compromised. You couldn't just pop down to a stationery store to buy another roll. Obtaining more papyrus meant navigating bureaucratic channels, waiting for shipments, or even personally traveling to acquire it, all while your backlog of work grew. A common historical fact is that in times of economic hardship or political instability, the supply of papyrus could indeed be disrupted, impacting record-keeping across the empire. Then there was the fear of waste. Every sheet of papyrus was valuable. Making a mistake meant not just correcting an error, but potentially wasting an entire sheet, a significant financial loss. Imagine the immense pressure to achieve absolute perfection with every stroke of your pen. A single blot, a misplaced hieroglyph, a skipped line. Any error could mean you had to discard a sheet or attempt a painstaking, often messy, erasure. And erasing was difficult and imperfect. It involved scraping away layers of the papyrus, leaving thin, fragile spots. Imagine the frustration, the self-reproach, and the fear of reprimand from your superiors for such a costly error. This constant pressure for flawless execution was amplified by the preciousness of your medium. The physical nature of papyrus itself added to the anxiety. It was fragile. Over time, it could become brittle, prone to cracking, especially in the dry desert air. It was also susceptible to damage from moisture, insects, and rodents. Imagine working on a vital scroll, hundreds of feet long, knowing that a single drop of water, a careless handling, or an unnoticed insect could destroy months of work. Your careful copy, your meticulously recorded data, could literally crumble to dust or be eaten away, representing not just a loss of material, but a loss of irreplaceable information and immense labor. Archaeologists and papyrologists still spend countless hours meticulously conserving and piecing together fragmented ancient papyri, underscoring their inherent fragility. The consequences of insufficient papyrus or mistakes could be severe. If you couldn't complete your reports, record taxes, or copy legal documents due to lack of materials or repeated errors, it could have direct repercussions for the pharaoh's administration. Imagine being held responsible for a shortfall in tax collection because you didn't have enough papyrus to record the assessments, or for a delay in a building project because the supply list couldn't be finalized. Such failures could lead to official reprimands, loss of status, or even physical punishment, as clerical accuracy was paramount in the rigid Egyptian bureaucracy. Moreover, the act of writing on papyrus itself, while central to your identity, was not always a comfortable experience. The rough texture of some papyrus, the need for a precise pen, and the constant awareness of its value added layers of stress to an already monotonous and physically demanding job. So, as you hear the distant rustle of an imaginary papyrus roll, remember that for an ancient Egyptian scribe, the very medium of their craft was a constant source of anxiety. The scarcity, fragility, and cost of papyrus meant that every stroke of the pen was a high-stakes gamble against waste and error, amplifying the pressure of their already demanding role. It certainly makes you appreciate your endless supply of cheap paper and the undo button on your computer, doesn't it? For an Egyptian scribe, the price of knowledge wasn't just tuition, it was the constant worry about the precious sheets beneath their hand. You've just grappled with the anxiety of papyrus shortages, a constant worry for any ancient Egyptian scribe. But even with a steady supply of costly writing material, your life was far from peaceful. Now, prepare to confront the immense pressure of bureaucratic blunders and royal wrath, where absolute accuracy was paramount. And even a minor mistake in records or orders impacting the pharaoh could lead to severe, terrifying punishments. Imagine yourself an ancient Egyptian scribe, perhaps working for the royal administration, the treasury, or even directly for the pharaoh's court. Your work isn't just about copying texts, it's about recording, calculating, and issuing orders that directly impact the vast, complex machinery of the Egyptian state. Your accuracy is not merely a professional courtesy, it's a matter of cosmic order, Ma'at, and, more importantly, a matter of life and death. The pressure for absolute accuracy was immense. Imagine tallying grain harvest for taxation, a single miscounted granary. A misplaced zero or a transposed number could lead to a significant shortfall in the pharaoh's revenue, or an unfair burden on a village. You're not just writing numbers, you're determining the wealth of the kingdom. Imagine meticulously recording troop movements and supplies for a military campaign. A mistake in a supply list could leave soldiers starving or unarmed on a distant battlefield, jeopardizing the pharaoh's victory. These weren't trivial errors. They had immediate, tangible, and potentially catastrophic consequences. A common historical fact is that detailed administrative papyri show the Egyptians' meticulous approach to record-keeping, underscoring the critical importance of scribal accuracy. Then there was the terrifying prospect of royal wrath. The pharaoh was considered a living god, and to displease him was to invite not just human punishment, but divine retribution. If your bureaucratic blunder led to a significant problem, a granary shortfall, a logistical disaster, or a miscommunication in a royal decree, the blame would fall squarely on you. Imagine being summoned before a high official, or even the pharaoh himself, your heart pounding, knowing that your mistake might be perceived as incompetence, negligence, or even disloyalty. The pharaoh's anger was a force of nature, unpredictable and absolute. The punishments for scribal errors could be severe. While not always execution, they could include public humiliation, severe beatings with the kirbash, a type of whip, demotion, or forced labor. Imagine being publicly shamed, your esteemed status as a scribe stripped away, and then enduring a brutal lashing for a miscalculation, or being reassigned from a comfortable office to the backbreaking, deadly labor of the quarries or mines, a grim form of intellectual exile. You'd witness other scribes fall from grace for similar infractions, a chilling reminder that no matter your privilege, you were still a servant and disposable. Historians still debate the specific frequency and severity of punishments for scribal errors, noting that while the rhetoric was harsh, practical considerations sometimes led to less extreme outcomes. But the threat was ever present. The very act of writing a royal decree or a sacred text carried immense weight. Every word had to be perfect, every instruction unambiguous. Imagine the pressure of transcribing the pharaoh's commands, knowing that any ambiguity or error could lead to confusion, insubordination, or even a challenge to the pharaoh's divine authority. You were literally writing the law, and your precision was paramount. Beyond direct errors, scribes could also be caught in the crossfire of political intrigue. If you served a powerful noble or a specific faction, and their political fortunes shifted, you could be implicated. Imagine being accused of falsifying records or manipulating information on behalf of a disgraced official, even if you were merely following orders. Your loyalty would be questioned, and your life could be in danger, simply for being the keeper of sensitive information. The constant need for vigilance and meticulousness would be mentally exhausting. You couldn't afford a single lapse in concentration, a moment of fatigue. Every number had to be checked, every phrase reread. This relentless pursuit of perfection, under the looming shadow of severe consequences, would create immense stress and anxiety, making the intellectual life of a scribe far from a peaceful pursuit. Your mind would be constantly on guard, reviewing, double-checking, ensuring absolute flawlessness. So, as you hear the distant echoes of administrative commands, remember that for an ancient Egyptian scribe, literacy came with a heavy price, the constant burden of absolute accuracy. Even the smallest bureaucratic blunder could invite the terrifying wrath of the pharaoh, making their esteemed profession a high-stakes gamble where precision was paramount, and mistakes could be met with brutal retribution. It certainly makes you appreciate spell-check calculators and legal protections against arbitrary punishment. Doesn't it for an Egyptian scribe? The pen truly held the power of life and death, both for others and for themselves. You've just grappled with the immense pressure of bureaucratic blunders and the terrifying wrath of the pharaoh, a constant weight on a scribe's shoulders. But beyond the internal anxieties of precision, a scribe's daily life also involved a significant amount of public service, a relentless grind of tedious and often uncomfortable interactions with diverse, sometimes demanding, segments of society. Forget secluded studies. You were often on the front lines of Egyptian bureaucracy. Imagine yourself as a scribe, not just in a quiet scriptorium, but out in the bustling marketplace, or down by the busy docks of the Nile. Your skills are vital for every aspect of Egyptian life, and people from all walks of life would seek you out. This meant dealing with a constant stream of individuals, each with their own demands, frustrations, and often little understanding of your meticulous work. One common task was recording legal proceedings and contracts. Imagine sitting in a dusty courtyard, under the relentless sun, diligently transcribing the arguments of two disputing farmers, or drafting a marriage contract for a nervous couple. You'd have to listen carefully, ensuring every word was accurately captured, every detail precise, knowing that any error could have significant legal repercussions for the parties involved. The endless bickering, the emotional outbursts, the sheer mundane details of civil disputes all had to be perfectly documented. A common historical fact is that scribes were essential for the functioning of the legal system, as literacy was rare and most legal documents required precise written records. Then there was the collection of taxes and census data. Imagine traveling to various villages and agricultural estates, recording the yield of crops, counting livestock, and tallying the number of inhabitants. You'd be dealing with reluctant farmers trying to hide their true wealth, or resentful villagers complaining about their burdens. You'd have to be firm, meticulous, and often confrontational. Imagine the arguments, the attempts at bribery, and the general unpleasantness of extracting resources from people who had little to give. You were the face of the pharaoh's authority, and often the recipient of public resentment. Your days could be filled with tedious accounting under an oppressive sun. Far from the quiet contemplation of hieroglyphs, scribes also played a crucial role in managing labor for vast public works projects. Imagine standing on the construction site of a massive temple or pyramid, surrounded by thousands of laborers, the air thick with dust and the sounds of hammering and shouting. Your job would be to record the daily attendance of workers, assign tasks, track materials, and manage supplies. This meant interacting with foremen, engineers, and countless laborers, often dealing with complaints, arguments, and the inevitable inefficiencies of such colossal undertakings. You'd be exposed to the elements, the noise, and the raw, physical demands of a massive construction site, a stark contrast to the intellectual work you were trained for. Historians still debate the extent of direct scribal supervision on such sites versus relying on lower-ranking overseers. But the scribes were undoubtedly the logistical backbone. Beyond these official duties, you might also serve as a public letter writer. Since most Egyptians were illiterate, people would come to you to write letters for them, appeals to officials, messages to distant relatives, or even love letters. Imagine listening to the intimate details of a stranger's life, then translating their thoughts and emotions into formal script, all while maintaining a professional distance. This could be monotonous, repetitive, and sometimes emotionally draining, as you became a conduit for countless personal dramas. The constant need to be diplomatic yet firm was a significant psychological burden. You were often mediating disputes, delivering unpleasant news like tax demands, or enforcing strict regulations. You had to navigate complex social interactions, dealing with everyone from powerful nobles to humble peasants, ensuring your authority was respected without inciting open defiance. Any misstep could lead to complaints against you, or even physical confrontation if you were in a less secure environment. So, as you hear the distant murmur of an imaginary ancient Egyptian crowd, remember that for a scribe, life wasn't just about elegant writing. It was a constant engagement with the messy, demanding realities of public service. Their days were filled with tedious interactions, mundane record-keeping in challenging environments, and the uncomfortable role of being the face of bureaucracy for a diverse, often resistant populace. It certainly makes you appreciate customer service lines and digital record-keeping, doesn't it? For an Egyptian scribe, the pen often felt heavier when wielded in the dusty, clamoring public square. You've just navigated the tedious and often uncomfortable demands of a scribe's public service, a constant engagement with the mundane realities of bureaucracy. But beyond the physical and mental strain of your work, your very livelihood, the meticulous art of writing, carried a built-in, agonizingly slow, and inevitable cursed scribe's eye strain and eventual blindness. Forget perfectly corrected vision, working in dim, dusty conditions, constantly focusing on tiny details, meant your eyesight was doomed to a gradual, painful decline. Imagine yourself an ancient Egyptian scribe, spending countless hours bent over a papyrus roll. The light in your workspace, whether a temple scriptorium or a government office, was often poor. Sunlight, even when abundant outside, was carefully controlled within monumental buildings to protect fragile papyri and painted reliefs from fading. This meant working in perpetual gloom, relying on flickering oil lamps or smoky torches. Imagine trying to decipher intricate hieroglyphs or meticulously form tiny hieratic strokes in this dim, inconsistent light. Your eyes would constantly strain, struggling to perceive the fine details, causing immediate fatigue and a dull ache behind your eyeballs. A common historical fact is that Egyptian lamps, typically small pottery bowls with a wick, provided very little light, often barely enough to illuminate a small area. The very act of writing contributed directly to the problem. You were constantly focusing on minute details, the precise angle of a stroke, the tiny curves of a symbol. This intense, unwavering concentration, maintained for hours on end, without the benefit of regular breaks or modern eye exercises, would lead to severe eye strain. Imagine the headaches, the burning sensation in your eyes, and the blurring vision as your ocular muscles fatigued. You'd find yourself rubbing your eyes constantly, trying to clear the haze, but the strain would be relentless. Then there was the dust. Ancient Egyptian environments were inherently dusty. Whether you were in a tomb recording inscriptions, a granary tallying grain, or a busy office handling old papyri, dust was omnipresent. Imagine the fine grit irritating your eyes, contributing to dryness, redness, and discomfort. This, combined with the smoky atmosphere from lamps and occasional incense, would only exacerbate eye irritation and potential infection. As the years of constant strain accumulated, your eyesight would inevitably begin to deteriorate. You'd find yourself squinting more, holding text closer, or needing brighter and smokier lamps. Imagine the frustration of your once sharp vision becoming progressively blurry, making your meticulous work increasingly difficult and agonizingly slow. Without eyeglasses or any form of corrective lenses, there was no way to remedy this decline. Your only recourse would be to bring the writing surface closer, further straining your already damaged eyes. Historians still debate the specific prevalence of severe vision impairment among ancient scribes, but it's a logical consequence of their working conditions and the nature of their craft. The ultimate terrifying prospect was blindness. For a scribe, losing your eyesight meant losing your livelihood, your status, and your very identity. Imagine the despair of knowing that your most vital skill, the one that elevated you above the masses, was slowly being stolen from you by the very act of performing your duties. You'd witness older scribes struggling, their eyes milky or clouded, their hands no longer steady enough for fine script, perhaps reduced to dictating to younger scribes, or worse, and forced into retirement with meager means. This wasn't a quick, merciful end. It was a slow, agonizing descent into darkness, a living nightmare for someone whose life revolved around the written word. The lack of understanding about eye care only worsened the problem. There were no ophthalmologists, no understanding of vision defects or diseases. Any treatments would be based on superstition or ineffective herbal remedies. Imagine trying to soothe your burning, deteriorating eyes with unproven concoctions, hoping against hope for a miracle that would never come. So, as you hear the faint scratch of a reed pen, remember that for an ancient Egyptian scribe, the very act of their esteemed profession carried an inherent, agonizing curse. Their dedication to literacy and record-keeping was paid for in aching eyes and the horrifying prospect of a slow, inevitable descent into blindness, making their intellectual life a constant gamble with their most precious sense. It certainly makes you profoundly grateful for modern eye care, comfortable lighting, and the ease of digital screens. Doesn't it for an Egyptian scribe? The light of knowledge eventually dimmed their own vision. You've just confronted the agonizing reality of a scribe's deteriorating vision, a physical burden intrinsic to their craft. But beyond the bodily pains and bureaucratic pressures, a scribe's esteemed position also came with a unique form of solitude, social isolation, and intellectual burden. Forget casual mingling or a robust personal life. A scribe's immersion in texts and their specialized knowledge often separated them from common folk and even practical skills. fostering a unique brand of loneliness. Imagine yourself, an ancient Egyptian scribe, having spent years mastering intricate hieroglyphs and complex administrative procedures. This advanced education, while granting you privilege, also set you profoundly apart from the vast majority of the population who remained illiterate. Your world was one of texts, numbers, and abstract concepts, while theirs was one of physical labor, oral traditions, and immediate concerns. This created an intellectual chasm that made genuine, deep social connection with common people incredibly difficult. You could communicate with them, yes, but could you truly relate to their daily struggles in the same way? A common historical fact is that scribes formed a distinct social class, elevated above laborers but below the highest nobility and priests. Existing in a unique intellectual bubble, your daily life often involved long hours in relatively secluded settings, a temple scriptorium, a government office, or a royal archive. While you might work alongside other scribes, the nature of the work itself was often solitary, demanding intense individual concentration. Imagine the quiet, broken only by the scratch of pens or hushed whispers, a stark contrast to the lively, boisterous life of a farmer or a craftsman. This meant fewer opportunities for casual social interaction, for forming the easy friendships that come from shared physical labor or community leisure. The very knowledge you possessed, while a source of pride, was also a burden. You were privy to sensitive information, royal decrees, tax records, military intelligence, and the intricacies of religious rituals. This meant you had to be discreet, guarded in your speech, and wary of whom you confided in. Imagine living with the weight of state secrets or religious mysteries, unable to share them with your family or friends outside the immediate scribal circle. This cultivated a cautious, almost paranoid demeanor, further limiting spontaneous social engagement. Historians still debate the extent to which scribes might have socialized within their own professional guilds, balancing their isolation from the general populace with camaraderie among peers. However, broader societal integration was challenging. Furthermore, your specialized skills in writing often came at the expense of practical, physical skills. While a scribe might accompany an official to survey fields, you weren't personally tilling the soil or building a wall. Your hands were for the reed pen, not the hoe or the chisel. This could lead to a certain detachment from the practical realities of everyday life, and perhaps a subtle scorn from those who valued physical labor and direct utility. Imagine being seen as physically weak or lacking common sense by those whose hands were hardened by honest toil. Despite your intellectual prowess, your professional life also often involved working for powerful, sometimes capricious, masters, the pharaoh, high priests, or influential nobles. This created a dynamic where your social interactions were almost always hierarchical, defined by deference and obedience. You were rarely in a position of true equality outside your immediate scribal peers. If even then, imagine constantly performing your role, suppressing your own opinions, and adapting to the demands of your superiors, leaving little room for authentic self-expression in your social interactions. The very pursuit of knowledge, while rewarding, was a solitary journey. Reading and studying ancient texts, memorizing complex lists, and mastering intricate calculations were often individual endeavors. You spent countless hours absorbed in your own thoughts, your own mental world, far removed from the communal activities that define the lives of most Egyptians. This deep immersion in intellectual pursuits, while elevating you, also built invisible walls between you and the less learned. So, as you hear the distant murmur of an imaginary Egyptian conversation, remember that for a scribe, the elevated status of literacy often came with a profound sense of social isolation. Their lives were deeply immersed in texts and specialized knowledge, separating them from the daily rhythms and easy camaraderie of common folk, leaving them in a unique, often solitary, intellectual sphere. It certainly makes you appreciate diverse social circles and the ability to connect with people from all walks of life, doesn't it? For an Egyptian scribe, the pen often brought knowledge, but also a quiet, isolating solitude. You've just been confronted with the unique social isolation and intellectual burden that came with being an ancient Egyptian scribe. But for all their respected status and specialized knowledge, scribes were far from invulnerable. Now, prepare to witness the vulnerability of status, discovering how, despite their privilege, a scribe's position was often precarious and utterly dependent on the shifting winds of royal favor, the unpredictable whims of noble masters, or the harsh realities of bureaucratic power struggles. Imagine yourself as an ancient Egyptian scribe, perhaps having achieved a mid-level position in a temple, an army, or a government department. You enjoy a comfortable life, free from manual labor, and hold considerable respect. But your position is not truly secure. It rests on a fragile foundation, easily shattered by forces beyond your control. The most significant threat came from the pharaoh's favor. The pharaoh was a living god, and his word was absolute. If a new pharaoh ascended the throne, he might bring his own trusted officials and scribes, potentially displacing you. Or if you displease the reigning pharaoh, perhaps through a perceived mistake as we discussed with bureaucratic blunders, a political misstep, or simply a change in royal mood, your career could end abruptly. Imagine being stripped of your office, your wealth confiscated, and being left with nothing. Or worse, banished to a life of manual labor. Your entire livelihood and status were utterly dependent on the unpredictable whims of one all-powerful individual. A common historical fact is that during periods of political upheaval, scribal careers could rise and fall dramatically with each new regime or powerful vizier. Then there was the precariousness of serving a noble master. Many scribes were attached to the households of wealthy nobles or powerful officials. While this could offer direct patronage and opportunities, it also tied your fate directly to theirs. If your noble master fell from favor, was accused of treason, or simply died without a clear successor, you could find yourself unemployed, without protection, or even implicated in their downfall. Imagine dedicating your life to serving a family, only for their fortunes to turn, leaving you vulnerable and discarded. You are a valuable asset, but also a disposable one. The political intrigues within the bureaucracy itself were another constant threat. The scribal class was vast and hierarchical, with fierce competition for higher positions. Ambitious rivals would constantly seek to undermine you, spreading rumors, exaggerating your mistakes, or even fabricating accusations to advance their own careers. Imagine having to constantly watch your back, knowing that your own colleagues might be plotting your downfall, hoping to seize your office or your patron's favor. This created an atmosphere of subtle paranoia, where trust was a luxury you could rarely afford. Historians still debate the specific dynamics of scribal advancement and rivalry, but the evidence of competition and occasional corruption is clear from ancient texts. Even your specialized knowledge, while granting status, could make you vulnerable. You were privy to sensitive information, tax records, military plans, legal documents, and private correspondence. This knowledge, if misused or leaked, could be incredibly dangerous, not just for others, but for yourself. Imagine being suspected of leaking a secret or being pressured by rival factions to provide incriminating information. You would be caught between powerful forces, your life in danger simply for being the keeper of vital data. Economic downturns or periods of instability also posed a threat. If the state's finances dwindled, or if a famine affected the agricultural output, scribes, like other state employees, could face reduced rations, delayed payments, or even temporary unemployment. Imagine your comfortable life suddenly disrupted by economic hardship, forced to rely on meager savings or the charity of others. A stark reminder that even intellectual labor wasn't immune to the harsh realities of ancient Egyptian life. Finally, while generally exempt from manual labor, a scribe could still be forced into arduous tasks as punishment or during times of extreme need. Imagine being a respected record keeper, suddenly assigned to oversee a chaotic labor gang in the scorching sun, or pressed into service for a military campaign. far from your comfortable office. This threat, even if rare, was a constant reminder that your status, while privileged, was ultimately granted by higher powers and could be revoked. So, as you hear the distant rustle of papyrus and the murmur of an ancient court, remember that, for an Egyptian scribe, the elevated status of their profession came with a profound and constant vulnerability. Their privilege was a delicate thing, always dependent on the fickle winds of power and the constant threat of ambitious rivals. It certainly makes you appreciate modern labor protections, job security, and the ability to change careers. Doesn't it for an Egyptian scribe? The pen might have been mighty, but it was also a tool that could lead to a sudden, terrifying fall from grace. You've just explored the precariousness of a scribe's privileged status, always vulnerable to shifting favors and political intrigues. Now, let's conclude our journey by reflecting on a more mundane, yet pervasive reality that marked every ancient Egyptian scribe, a life of constant ink stains. Forget pristine uniforms or spotless hands. The truth was a daily struggle against indelible black and red ink, leaving a permanent mark on your fingers, your clothes, and your very identity as a professional. Imagine yourself, an ancient Egyptian scribe, at the end of a long day of meticulous writing. Your fingers, particularly your thumb and forefinger on your writing hand, are deeply stained with the black ink you've used for hieratic script, and perhaps reddish-brown from the red ink used for headings and important words. This isn't a temporary smudge, it's a pervasive, almost permanent discoloration. Imagine scrubbing your hands with sand or abrasive cloths, trying desperately to remove the deep-set stains, only for them to remain, a visible badge of your profession. You'd always carry this mark, a constant reminder of your trade, whether you were at work or at home. A common historical fact is that depictions of scribes often show their hands stained with ink, visually confirming this aspect of their daily lives. Beyond your hands, your clothing would inevitably bear the marks of your profession. While you might wear white linen, the very act of dipping your reed pen into inkwells, sharpening your pen with a knife, and unrolling papyrus rolls in dusty environments meant accidental splatters and smudges were unavoidable. Imagine a splash of black ink on your pristine white kilt, or a faint red smear on your tunic. These weren't easily washed out. Linen, while pure, absorbs ink readily. So your work clothes, and perhaps even your everyday garments, would slowly accumulate a collection of ink stains, tiny reminders of countless hours spent at your craft. There was no dry cleaning, no stain removers. These marks were largely permanent, adding a certain lived-in, if not always pristine, quality to your wardrobe. The writing instruments and materials themselves contributed to the mess. Your wooden palette, designed to hold your ink cakes and pens that would be perpetually stained. Your reed pens, after countless uses, would be soaked with ink, inevitably dripping as you moved them. The ink cakes themselves, made from ground pigments like soot for black and red ochre for red mixed with a binder, were powdery and could easily smudge if not handled carefully. Imagine preparing your ink, grinding the pigments, the fine dust settling on your work surface and perhaps your clothes. This was a messy art, even for the most careful practitioner, and the work environment itself could be less than ideal. Whether in a dusty temple scriptorium or an open-air office, you were constantly exposed to airborne particles of papyrus fibers, ink dust, and general grime. This would settle on your person and your writing materials, contributing to the overall sense of perpetual messiness. Despite your best efforts at cleanliness, the psychological impact of this constant messiness, while not as profound as the threats of a pharaoh's wrath or blindness, would still be a subtle, persistent annoyance. You might strive for perfection in your writing, but your body and your surroundings would always bear the marks of the dirty reality of your craft. It was a constant battle against physical stains, a reminder that even a privileged, intellectual profession had its unglamorous, messy side. Your identity as a scribe was not just intellectual, it was physical, embodied by the ink that permeated your existence. Historians and art conservators often analyze the composition of ancient Egyptian inks, noting their durability and resistance to fading, which also meant they were difficult to remove from unintended surfaces. So, as you hear the distant scratch of an imaginary reed pen and envision the intricate hieroglyphs, remember that for an ancient Egyptian scribe, their esteemed profession came with a constant, pervasive messiness. Their hands, clothes, and workspace were perpetually stained with the ink that brought knowledge and administration to life. A permanent, indelible mark of their dedicated craft? It certainly makes you appreciate erasable pens and easy access to laundry facilities, doesn't it? For an Egyptian scribe, the tools of their trade were literally branding them, day in and day out. You have completed your journey through the little-known realities of the life of an ancient Egyptian scribe. We have explored the grueling challenges of script school, the physical toll of daily writing, the monotony of endless copying and writing, the threat of papyrus shortages, administrative errors and the wrath of the pharaoh, the hardships of public service, eye problems and the risk of blindness, social isolation and intellectual burdens, the fragility of status, and finally, a life of constant ink. As you drift off to sleep, let the images of quills, papyrus scrolls, and indelible ink fade away. It is a poignant reminder that even the most learned face daily challenges, and that knowledge sometimes comes at a rather dirty price. End of scenario. Good night.